This is going to be a fun reading with three wonderful poets who've recently published their first books. I'll introduce them all together so I don't have to keep jumping up and sitting down. If you have questions for our writers about the process of sort of getting from the writing workshop to published, or about the ins and outs of the publishing world, or just the writing life, like how one goes from being a student of writing to being an actual writer out in the world, I think this is a good opportunity to ask those questions. Since this is a relatively, it's an experience that these writers have gone through fairly recently. So they're going to read in alphabetical order. We'll start with Lorraine Doran. Lorraine is the author of A Phrasebook for the Pleiades, winner of the Cider Press Review Award, a book that Eamon Grennan describes as a world of wide awake awareness and visionary edges with its own kind of understated rapture. Lorraine's work has been published in Gulf Coast, Field, Barn Owl Review, the American Poetry Journal, and she teaches at New York University. Lorraine will be followed by Anna Ross, author of If a Storm, winner of the Anhinga Prize in Poetry, and the chapbook Hawk Weather. Anna's work has appeared in Barrow Street, the Paris Review, the New Republic, Southwest Review, Southern Poetry Review, and the American Reader. She teaches at Emerson College and lives in Dorchester with her husband and two children, and Anna grew up in West Hartford, right down the road. Bringing the reading to a close will be R.A. Villanueva, who comes to us all the way from London, via Brooklyn, via New Jersey. Ron's book, Relicaria, won the Prairie Schooner Book Prize, and he is also the winner of the inaugural 9th Letter Award for Poetry. His work has appeared in Agni, 5 Points, Gulf Coast, and the Virginia Quarterly Review, and he is a founding editor of the innovative and exciting online journal Tongue, a journal of writing and art. Please welcome all three writers to Trinity, and first up to read will be Lorraine.
Thank you, Kieran. Thank you all for being here. We've been talking about home, so that's where I'm going to start. And these are poems from a series I wrote about looking at places I lived on Google Earth, which most of you are probably too young to appreciate how weird that is, to look at a place that has gone on or not gone on without you being there. So it's called Satellite Photos of Our Former Homes. Legend. From here, you can see my hometown is roughly heart-shaped, because that is how the filthy river bends. Valentine heart, not fist heart, the sharp part pointing at where locust becomes mane, and the crooked line darkens, because that is where the river scores the earth most deeply. 229. The street was called something like Hayworth or Hawthorne, except it wasn't a word you've heard before. We lived on the block between a tavern and the funeral home. It was busy between 4 and 7 every day, between wakes. The Red Dot is the candy store I stole from the day I left for summer camp, where a girl named Tijuana taught me how to speak in the third person. Tijuana don't drink no milk, she would say every morning at breakfast. That was the summer before the landlord died in my mother's arms as his wife shouted, "Do something." People are always shouting, "Do something," to my mother in the tone we use when there is nothing to be done. His wife said nothing for weeks after, except for his name. Tijuana don't like where it came from. I'd never thought of it that way before. I'd never thought part of the self could be pared away, becoming something separate with its own name. 200 Mount Pleasant. This house is gone now. You are looking at a ghost house. I like not being at the mercy of the real, the absence. I like thinking there's this one dream everyone has. It makes me feel more human. Last night I had the dream about falling, and the night before that, the one where you hit the deer with your car. It always runs into the woods. You never know if it lived or died. Unless something breaks, You can't even tell it happened. The red dot near the rose bush is either the top of my head or my grandmother's Pekingese. I am 7 years old. It is midday, and I am behaving myself. My dress remains clean, but I am about to scrape my knee. I'm watching ants drag a monarch butterfly through the dirt. It takes hundreds of them. I wonder if it will bleed. I wonder if these are the same anthills my mother's brothers used to stick firecrackers into. They said it's no worse than what happens when it rains. This house had a piano in the basement, right outside the bomb shelter, around the corner from the washing machine. It's amazing what water can do. Maybe someday I will teach myself to be cruel. Maybe ants get used to it, the perpetual building. But I am not yet imagining the future. I am 7 years old, certain that when the floods come, this will be the last house standing. Penance. Jennifer, when you called tonight from Las Vegas, crying over the lost brooch your mother left you, I was at Sacred Heart, the priest saying, "Do this in memory of me." Rehearsing our first communion, I couldn't get my hands to fold the way they asked, like wings. Eavesdropping online for the confessional, I gathered sins. Do not make your shame a palpable thing. Do not make it a sound. The kneeler took my prints like beeswax. You were there. You are the tall one in a group photo the color has mostly gone out of. I am in the front row, wearing borrowed pearls. Later, I was with you in the science lab and outside the oxygen tent in your little pink house. It's hard to believe the same grief can happen twice. It's hard to use the words "passed away" when speaking of both parents to strangers. These are things to be sorry for. You will be sorry if you mistake dandelions in a field for 1,000 suns, if you run through them trying to catch yourself on fire. The cyanotic child. Being born blue is like holding the sky inside you. It's the same trick of the eye. Your mother whispers, "You are made of hyacinth," and you try to speak the language of flowers. Imagine a tongue covered in pollen. Call the bees inside you, but the bees will not come. Swallow sharp things. You bleed. You fade. You learn the sky is not blue either. Nor is the earth as round as they said it was. More apple than orange, and you are more seed than flower. Not the flourishing, but the heart. Its green shoot that will someday tear the earth. The sky, benevolent lies, divots that have marred your once perfect world. The end written into the beginning, red flowers spilling out of you. The sky now above where it belongs. A white sky filled with black wings, and your heart like the seed in a bird's mouth. Another poem about the heart. I'm going to read this because I know Kieran likes it, and coming up on the anniversary of Elliott Smith's death, a singer, maybe you've heard of him. Elliott Smith, appropriately enough. Henry Gray can tell you the depth and breadth and height of the heart, but not how many hours until someone comes home to you. The rhythmical action of the heart, he wrote, is muscular in origin. That is to say, the heart moves itself, and nerves have no say in it. Snow on your skin can be felt, a choke chain, pricks of poison, the dimensions of the living room when empty can be felt, all of it unnecessary to the movement of your heart. During times of rest, the whole heart is relaxed, if given the chance, if the bones of the hand do not articulate precisely as asked, if it ever becomes safe to stop hiding the knives. During life, there is no vacant space, something for every cage, the carve of ribs, a lovely fist enclosing. This is the architecture of your heart. This one is, I guess, more arranged than written. It's made of lines, all said by Jasper Johns. I took them from various places. It's called I Just Sit and Wonder. Someone traced a shadow on the ground, and I cut it out. Doesn't matter whose shadow it was. The arm is a kind of form I've used repeatedly. It suggests a motion in time, a kind of record. Does it matter whose shadow it was? It was either his or mine. It suggests a motion in time, a kind of record. The arms are Hart Crane's arms, either his or mine. I don't want my work to be an exposure of my feelings. The arms are Hart Crane's arms, diving off a boat, dying. I don't want my work to be an exposure of my feelings. Art is either complaint or appeasement, diving off a boat or dying. I believe it's luck. Art is either complaint or appeasement. I don't know what comes from what. I believe it's luck. Scaffold and rope, snowman, rabbit duck. I don't know what comes from what. My expression of life is that it's very fragmented. Rabbit in the snow, man, scaffold, rope. Don't trust my placement. My expression of life is that it's very fragmented, aspects and movable aspects. Don't trust my placement. I just sit and wonder. Aspects and movable aspects, like the Minotaur's cart of belongings. I just sit and wonder, borrowing ladder and stars from the Minotaur's cart of belongings. Most of my thoughts involve impurities. Horse gives birth to seahorse, one thing made of another. Most of my thoughts involve impurities. I attempt the uncalled for, one thing made of another. Beckett said, there will be no more I. I attempt the uncalled for. I try to hide my psychic state, my emotion. Beckett said there will be no more I. Eventually, it seemed like a losing battle, trying to hide my psychic state, my emotion, take a skull, cover it with paint. Eventually, it seemed like a losing battle. Finally, one must simply drop the reserve, rub it against canvas, skull against canvas. My work feeds upon itself. Finally, one must simply drop the reserve. It has to be what you can't avoid. My work feeds upon itself. The arm is a kind of form I've used repeatedly. It is what I can't avoid. Someone traces a shadow on the ground, and I cut it out. I didn't tell you that was a pantoum because I think this is a pantoum made of things Jasper Johns said might be the most obnoxious thing you could say about a poem. But that's what it is. Let's just read a couple more. The horse letters. Finally, the fences swung open and the horses ran off. The hardest part was knowing what to call the loss. Memory made their markings run together, forming one horse of a single color. Years later, we were still trying to describe it, maybe in Arabian, but less steadfast and without the clean lines, made of wood with an army inside, or an escaped racehorse. You may know him, his name in all the papers, his neck a wall of roses. This is how forgetting happens. The sadness gets smaller, migrates. Tell me, what was it in this empty palm that meant so much? Where has it gone, my tether, my sugar cube? Clearly I am no expert. I am between horses. Once the question was put to me, feline is to cat as equine is to, and the answer seemed obvious. It makes its bed in the barn door's narrow sunlight and bends to a burden before knowing its weight. Postcard, Prague. On the 4th of July, I was lost in a cherry orchard near the world's largest metronome. It points the way to the Museum of Miniatures, where the Eiffel Tower stands inside a wild plum stone. A stranger kissed me between rosebush and riverbank. He found the button at the small of my back that makes stars fall. I have stopped wishing for something specific and enduring. I cannot tell if the city reflected in the river is still the city or another version of where we are. Thanks so much for listening.
Sorry, Lorraine, I didn't mean to step on your applause. Thanks for having me. This is great. It's really fun to be reading so close to my hometown. So thank you, Karen, and thank you all for being here. So the poems in my book sort of roughly narrate the creation of a family and through the locations in which that family was created. I'm just going to read from a few different poems that are set in a few different places. And this first one is in New York. We were just talking about New York, so I thought I'd read it. It's called By Morning. You are asleep, the sheets wound tight around your feet, your body an insistence of breathing. Helicopters shudder overhead as the city presses in, passes on. Yesterday, at the flower shop, I worried about time. The gladiolas I'd chosen closed tight with cold. But after wine and fish, we abandoned them and the dishes to themselves. Now, rising for water, I've caught them busy with unfurling, a quiet marshalling of color up the stalk, pink, orange, yellow, awake in this late summer of electric light. Let's see. So Ron and I got to have lunch with some very nice folks earlier today, and we talked about this poem a little bit, which made me think of reading it. This is in Wisconsin, in Door County, Wisconsin, which is a little peninsula that sticks up into one of the Great Lakes. I should know which one, but you guys can look it up. At low tide. In town for a cousin's wedding, we've borrowed a rowboat, wanting to trace the canal where reed beds fret the shipways and great blues cast narrow shade in the marsh lows. When we get close, they crick their necks into lowercase c's, unleashing accordion wings to beat upwards and away. Their matchstick legs dangle. At the reception the night before, the guests coupled off, awkward, on the dance floor, the DJ culling us by years married, 1, 5, 10, until the bride's grandparents waltzed 51 years alone. In the boat, you face backward, rowing, as I navigate, calling out each stranded high water dock, their pilings gangly, bleached bone by the sun. Tomorrow we'll fly home. We'll hear on arrival of the accident, the truck backing blind in the parking lot, the grandmother dead as she stepped from the curb. But here in the canal, the heat reaches down, slowing all to an eddy, clank of oarlock, shush of wing, suck of current against dock. Instinct or pattern will blind us. Even now, it is brighter as I remember it. Your hands resting the oars, herons stalking minnows to the burgeoning shores. So I'm going to skip to a little later in the book and later in the marriage. And I heard that some of you are interested or talking a lot about form right now with Karen. So I'll just admit up front that this is a crown of sonnets. And it addresses the loss of an unborn child. The setting is southwestern Montana, a really beautiful place on earth that I get to visit, fortunately. So the title is Flight. 1. Too late we found her, a pinhole heart already slowing its flutter through the ultrasound's static, each beat slipping a further cog. Oh, difference, half-sister to chance, we watched for you monthly, our landscape shortening to horizon. We know now to begin is difficult, to stay impossible. Each evening one gray owl flies out, and each morning returns to the creek aspen. Walking the back fences at noon, we find its mate caught against the barbs, its skull all beak and socket, its wing still feathered. 2. Its wing still feathered, as though the breast, hollow bone instrument, were waiting to breathe. The field next to ours is grazed down, and its cows watch us, hungry and shy. Our acre is long with timothy and foxtail and red cheatgrass. At night, the deer come to eat, their large, dark shapes followed by smaller ones. Mornings we find their beds, oval bowls pressed into the grass. We live in departure, the mountain always ahead. Beyond our bodies should be another, and beyond that, this field can't be learned. 3. This field can't be learned, not like the mountain with its paths and forecast, or the certain uncertainty of weather. Before a storm, the air tight with ignition, the creeks worrying their banks. We drive home by the river on washed roads through red afterlight, watching for the white pelicans that fish from sandbars this time of year. They have bred elsewhere and shed their mating horns by now. We've heard the reports, have memorized the turns where rain can bring down rocks on these roads, but repeat them to each other, a means of naming what we pass by. 4. A means of naming what we pass by, this day, this night, this day. From the porch, the land seems ordered, the near hills yellow-green terraces of buffalo jumps, the range rain-gray behind. We find bitterroot by the driveway, its bald flower tracing the curved slope like a floodline. The old gully that used to run here has gone dry, starving the grove of aspen behind it, each summer a few trees less. Here, water is a migrating animal, April melt, August rapids, October frost. We meet again each new month. 5. Again we meet each new month. With time, I can hear what you've stopped saying. Another one gone. We sleep into late morning and wake to find the deer have broken into the garden, eating the strawberries down to the roots. Quicker than we are, they don't bother to wait for the fruit to ripen. We abandon the fences and drive to town, passing a doe beside the highway, her fawn caught behind, waiting to cross. The valley is smaller at this end, enough to say everything has its limits. The cliffs so close we might hang a curtain between them, then draw it against the passing year. 6. Draw a curtain against the passing year, its voices catching and releasing like low water across a stony creek bed. We've listened long enough for doubt, preferring the well's deliberate crank, sudden rain. We've named ourselves immigrant, put down the old expecting language of daughter, of son, those dark cactus buds opening to wax-pale flowers. Today we see a flock of sandhills feeding in the river meadow. They clatter long, pointed bills to call their young at our approach, but food is plentiful here, the land wide enough for them to stay and watch, to consider if warning is needed. 7. If warning was needed or had been offered, if the mountain, shouldered in fir and penstemon, was not always above, if any other life, if sun, if a storm, if the waters raced high every season, shielding all swimmers from capture, if fireweed were as fierce as any blaze, if another year, another day, another hour, if the river ran south, if you were not you, if I were not I, if the body could be a bird, writing itself in air, mating each wing beat to that frail fluttering within. Too late, we found her. So I'll just read one more poem on that subject, which uses mythology for its landscape. And the title of the poem is What Her Mother Said, and the mother in question is Demeter, who was the mother of Persephone. What her mother said. When I found her, nettles had grown up into her hair, and there were no gods left in her eyes. Then winter crawled back to its deeps, leaving my fields to shake themselves out, warm and flat, under scuttling clouds. But this was not my doing. Don't speak to me of myth, that black river, those 6 red seeds, or sacrifice's ragged saw, you who have filled deserts with the drone of mechanical birds, you have no quarter here. No mother would be satisfied with half her child. Even crocuses sour in the brittle green of this spring. I was pretty mad. Just to reassure you, I have 2 wonderful, engaging, infuriating children. So I'm going to read a few poems about them to finish up. This one takes place very early in my daughter's life. My daughter's 7 now, so this is from her infancy. It's called Such a Thing as Light. From your infant window, I watch the April limbs of the maple move through the storm-lit sky. You do not know April or branch or storm. You know black, harrowing into white, the way you know milk, sharp in your throat, on its way to a place that has asked for it, that is unable to hold it, and so must keep asking. And this brightness you seek out in every corner, every hour, also cannot be held. Loss will never again define itself so simply. Your eyelids, tendril veins branching red across them, closing. I had a little request earlier in the day from someone who knows this book well, who may or may not be related to me. Anyway, this one is called Like Giants. My daughter's, well, I think it says in the poem that she's 3, so I didn't need to explain that. When you're a parent, you spend a lot of time in playgrounds. Like giants. Their bodies airborne, the big kids shout and fall from the swings to a riptide of elbows up the slide, legs spilling across the wood plank bridge to plunge over grass, and then gone. While you, stunned small into your 3 years self by these giants, what do you sound like? Today, the sky is a high blue tent, but tomorrow it may collapse into worn gray wool. And sometimes the moon wanders into the afternoon as though it has forgotten its name. If you spin around and then stop, the ground escapes. Someone is crying and you want to know why. Also, where the birds are going, and how the deer lying next to the road last month got there, and will it get up? No. Not ever? No. Each green leaf above a question you balance as you walk the perimeter wall, one foot leading the other, feeling for the edge. So it's only fair if I read one for my son to I have to really keep that in mind always. Someone might tell. So this one, so it's a similar subject to your poem about psionic birth. So my son was born early. And the nurses in the neonatal intensive care unit, where he had to spend a little time after his birth, refer to having an apnea moment, which is when a baby sort of forgets to breathe and has to be woken up again. And they call it having a spell, which makes him sound like a little Victorian lady. So that's where this title comes from. A spell. As she waves the bright blue hose over the baby's purple lips, giving him the breaths he has not yet learned to take, the nurse smiles at us, to be expected. Expected. January drift and calm, the routine earthquake of passing plows, and a black ice slope of sky the wind skitters down from an immeasurable north. Or, closer, the night shift trading its hours for day, clockwork rounds of residents declaiming, this is a 2,223-gram product of a 34-year-old female, pregnancy complicated by. The unseen chief delivers diagnosis, prematurity, jaundice, apnea, all signs normal. And now his butterfly hands expand, contract, dark-veined fingers reaching toward the hiss of air cascading from above, lid flit and charcoal iris, and his mouth's soft O receiving. And I think I'm going to go back in time, again inspired by Lorraine, to a poem set in the Czech Republic. Not Prague. I kind of got scared away from Prague. It was too crowded. So this is in Brno, which is the sort of second city of the Czech Republic. It's smaller and very beautiful. And one of the things that we discovered when we were traveling around in that part of the world are these monuments called plague columns, which are monuments both in memory of the victims of the Great Plague, but also sort of giving thanks for those who weren't killed. So this one is called Plague Column Brno. It'll be my last poem. Here in a town we've chosen for its white hotel room, skylit by 3 cool rectangles of glass, we will recall each paving block so exactly plumbed and placed, the thorough age of buildings guide to each other by tram wires, and shut cathedrals quietly sunning. Or, in Liberty Square, a plague column rising from its base of imprisoned victims past corniced saints and lampposts to its haloed virgin and child standing on a cow. Perhaps years later, town abbot Gregor Mendel would explain such penance with science, but this pillar, soothed round with height against a fugue of iron balustrades and aerials, holds no wiser knowledge than survival as we pass it, returning each night to the square, bright bed where we lie down. Thank you.
Cusp. A week home, and my nephew has now surprised me with this tooth he places in my palm with the force and grace of a small god. How he and I are shocked by the white of it, its root like Sanskrit chalks or the cusps of ice shells broken off and loosed from the southern glaciers. Of course there is blood. Of course I teach him names for what each body needs to give away. Of course I tear at the sound of his mouth turned to coins in the night. Blessed are all these gifts and songs from our young skulls. Butong Pakwan. Name a brother's son pterodactyl, and hold him to the sky and watch that boy compare your face to his father's, shape of the eyes, folds of the mouth. When he brings his forehead to meet yours, see a mark there, a soft red, same as the bruise between your brother's eyes, gone now, left by a fastball to his face that summer on the front lawn. You told Dad it was nothing and hoped he'd miss the seams and the blood just below the skin. Years ago, in Batangas, Grandpa wanted to see the ocean, so you cut his hair, took him to the coast, and sat him on the sand. You talked of salt and home. He practiced your names. How are y'all doing, by the way? You okay? Okay. Round of applause for Lorraine and Anna, please. There's so many family poems in the room, so I had to begin with two new ones. My brother's son's name is Pterodactyl, by the way. I mean, it's not, but that's what I call him. I can tell you that story later. Suffice to say, it was a bet that I won and that he reneged on. It's a much cooler name than his actual name. Is that on camera? That's terrible. It's terrible. Fish heads, yanked free at the gills from cartilage and spine. These fish heads my mother cleans, whose body she scales and throws all into salt water and crushed tamarind. At dinner, she alone will spoon out their eyes with her fingers and suck down each pair as we watch. You see, this is why the three of you could never hide anything from me. As though these organs brought her sight to be soaked through the tongue. When I tell her that I've tried to make this stew from memory, she warns, do not waste what should be eaten. It reminds me of every delicate gift we have thrown away. Tilapia stomach best soured with vinegar. Milkfish liver to melt against the dome of the mouth. That after church, a bucket of chicken soon became a blessing of wing gristle and skin, dark meat no one else wanted to save. We refused to taste her gizzards and hearts fried in fat. Mocked the smell of pig blood curdled on the stove, wished gone her tripe steamed with beef bouillon and onion broth. After my brother and sister push aside bowls of baby squid in garlic ink, and gag at my mention of ducks in their shells boiled alive in brine, my mother believes I was the only one to share in such things. Which maybe means, she says, in some former life, you and I were seabirds, or vampires, or wolves. So I'm here from London through Jersey. I've been spending a lot of time in New Jersey with my parents. And I've had this really strange experience this month of going to places where some of these poems had their genesis. And I went to the statue where this poem, the memory that this poem embodies took place, and they've since fixed the statue of Jesus. So you can rest assured it's fine. They fixed the hand that was broken, but I realized that the other hand is now broken. So it goes. I'm flying back to London on the 4th of October, by the way, which is the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. And usually what happens on the feast day of St. Francis is you bless the animals. You go to a parking lot near a church and they just bring all of the animals and they get blessed. Holy water, etc. This is blessing the animals. We have gathered up animals on this feast of St. Francis to be blessed. In a parking lot beside the church, cleared save for bales of hay and traffic horses, the goats and llamas from the petting zoo a town over are chewing at their cords, the camels' necks hung with scapulae. The elks and legion men have leashed border colliers to terriers, or garland parakeets with rosaries. They hold house cats in their arms. Our Monsignor crosses himself in front of a statue of Jesus and his most sacred heart, beside the flagpole where I learned to pledge allegiance, where I will later fold the stars and stripes into triangles to lock in the headmaster's desk. Next month, on my dare, Howie will throw a bottle of white out at Christ's face, break off every finger on the Lord's right hand except his third. Did someone just tisk me? Someone's channeling my mother. Life drawing. How she is quiet before his robe falls each week to his ankles. This man who sits nude for my wife, whom she draws with Conti sticks and pastel pencils. Each page in her notebook is a parade of his torsos, galley proofs of breastbones and chests. She explains, because these lines are my favorite, and shows me, traces with her knuckle tip, chin to sternum, jaw to shoulder, clavicle to cusp of the arm. How in 3 passes an artist makes a place for the head to rest. Later, in blue and orange pigments mixed at the edge of a knife, thinned with linseed oil and mineral spirits, my wife will paint him on a canvas primed black. Again, his body will end just above the pelvis, will fade into a fog of armrest or shadow, cushion, or hip as if rendered in some fugitive dye. Because he is only the second man I have seen naked, in person. His just the third I've seen in my life. When I tell my wife I want to write about her naked, sketch her back's faint taper as a class might to check perspective, describe the moles I notice on the underside of a breast as we make love, she says, I can. And in return, she will paint the whole of me, bare, from the neck down as I pose in our living room. No one will even know this is you. The light will blank out your face. I was telling the story earlier today that I was instructed never to read that poem in public. But I've been breaking that rule all month, so it goes. And since everyone is showing off their formal skills, you can't bat last and not, try it out. This is a Crown of Sonnets too. Hold on, I need coffee.
I did it with that one.
Yeah, she didn't.
Yeah, that's the impressive thing. Aftermaths. What the rains bring are trains, shorted, held fast to bridges between stops, boots, fireworks called off again. They say the city, mist-figured, flood-drummed, has wanted this for weeks, and they point to maps, cold sweeps, shifting pressure along the Arthur Kill up and out to the sound. But Friday was free of thunder and wind and dowed lines. You smoked on a front stoop, and she walked her dog, and I felt a sting at my shin from the salt and sweat in my stitches. We talked too long about small things, prom nights, driftwood, punchlines to jokes poorly translated, and had to remind ourselves why we were here. That sky, your sun, those grins. We are here because of that sky and those grins and grudges our sons will inherit, if not for us. Beneath Chamber Street, the walls are made with eyes, cracked tessera of sight lines dusted gray. Above, my wife walks to work past picket men, Gadsden flags, boys arm in arm, cradling full-color mock-ups of memorial voids in Story 15 cradled by fog. Everyone stares at everything else. It is what we know now. How we tell each other we survive upright in an America we own. But suppose I'm given no piece of your we, you say. Suppose your home smacks of war. And you say there was no time when home and war could be kept apart or held untroubled. Take how each drive out in the Pinelands would feel like crossing the Mason-Dixon, or how the white kids, massed in their pickups with empties and ropes, barreled into town dead set on catching her with him hand in hand. And now when I think about it, my mother is who I see. She spent her nights brushing my hair and tracing my eyes. In the mirror, she pointed and I named. Black. Almond. And Mom made sure to add blessed. Lucky. And I believed her then. I've learned my son is still too young to wonder where we're from or what we are. And before you ask, I've learned what we are is unwanted, marked by sighs and curses like some new kind of rot. Each summer since, and every flood-lit, bone-shaded never forget has arrived dressed with teeth, flags, their sight of me that night below Myrtle, fists in pockets, unsure of where to run. Boys that drunk mean what they say, and they promise and could care less about the color of your passport or where you call home. Fuck remembering their way. If we let them, soon all we'll have left are anthems, this looping montage of eagles and bugles and smoke. Remembering I need you to know takes names, faces ghosts. I need you to know I've tried. To name ghosts, to face them, dark as they are, slurred in with a city's glossed clots and fresh buttresses, this earthworks trilogy that passed through rebirth, it's to ask mercy from all that survives us. And yes, it's how we'll skin their myths. Ripe those mouths, rhyming bruise with brick, break with leave. Last night, stalled near Rector, I thought about the sound of particulate matter and burnt bone upon glass, about my brother who refuses to shake it off. My hands fell, emptied. I thought to knuckles, sutures, go home, cut into cheeks, how, weighted by their marrow, flightless birds want the sky. I'll end with this. Albumin. With the name of your first son, your mother speaks of her brothers, stillborn, laid to rest in the family plot. How the southern provinces flooded full those seasons, fat with novenas and rain. We look away. You kiss his face. Open your gown to nurse. Ask for someone to braid your hair. The boy has lungs like bellows, so you make a place for his lips. Then there's quiet. We stare up at a TV where detectives trawl a lakefront, trace a body with lights, bare its bruises and cuts. you close your eyes. Tell of his birth in warm water to your waist, and we pray, Holy Family, O Holy Ghost. Each of us raised by a family of ghosts and masks and talking gods. That the good Lord knew his mother dreamt nightly of boys cut down for him, held their eyes inside her, is certain. And that we know we have taken air from those we love is sure. In the albumin prints of Hopi dancers, the men all have snakes in their hair. In their hands or teeth, they sing for rain with rattles and whips. Faces flush with clay or feldspar. The sky behind them is parchment. They touch feathers to the earth. Think here of hands, noise, of covenant hymns. How Palm Sundays we spent the liturgy knotting crosses from branches and swords from leaves. Not lime or bleach, but oil and spore. Knives, sword sharp, left to the sink, catching rust. Each day, it proves more difficult to shrug away the cracks in the molding, the clots of hair in the drain. So I say, I love you more than anything, and mean you cannot die before I do. I mean, every joy we have nests within these bodies' finer rots. According to the numbers, we don't have much time. The glaciers are losing ground. White smoke blossoms from a caldera, and your womb grows tired of waiting for us to talk. What else do we have? I love you more than all of this. You cannot die before I do. Thank you.
So we have time for some questions. Who would like to ask a question of one of our writers?
Sounds like an auction.
Who would like to buy one of our writers? Or buy a crown sonnets from one of our writers? Maybe a pantoum? Anybody have a question? Is that a question? Yes.
I started to interview the novelist Donald Antrim, and he won a MacArthur Genius Prize, but prior to that he talked about kind of having these doubts about whether what he was doing had value to it. And I guess I wonder whether you struggle with that, and how you answer that.
Never.
Whether what I do has value. Well, how do you know that you're on the right track? How do you know?
Wait, I want to make eye contact with you because you're asking if my life has value. I just want to make sure I look you right in the face.
Well, you can hear different. Yeah.
I saw, I think it was a cartoon in New Yorker recently, and it was a Venn diagram, and it said, sort of the criteria to be an artist, and like one circle was, overweening narcissism, and the other was like abject self-doubt, and then in the middle was artist. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm constantly wondering if I'm doing the right thing, and I think that sometimes fuels my writing because I have to keep doing it, otherwise, who cares?
I mean, winning a MacArthur or a big prize is unbelievably affirming. I'm sure I've never gotten anywhere close to that. But I think when you write, it's not for those accolades. You're writing because something is messing with your head. And the only way to not be totally undone by those questions is to try to link those doubts and questions to words. Right? So, of course there's a question, of course there's like all of the uncertainties, but I don't think it's the award or the thing you put on your mantle that's going to make you feel any better about yourself.
I guess, it's all the time. Of course, I think we all do, but I think I got best advice, which wasn't really on this subject, but it turns out to address it from a teacher I took a workshop with once, and he said, never forget why you started doing this in the first place, and that's because it was fun. And that it should be an enjoyable act for you to sit down and play with words essentially and try to express what's going on inside you. And I think it's once you get in the world of like trying to publish, and this being around writers all the time, which you guys are, that all this kind of self-doubt starts to creep in and comparing yourself to other people. So you have to try to keep out the static as much as you can and just do it because it's fun, because you enjoy doing it. That's what
Forrest. This is right here. When did you all first get introduced to poetry, and when did you really start to love it? And that goes to anyone.
Reading it or writing it?
Writing it.
Writing it. I'm very late. I was very late. I had another career. I was a lawyer, and I loved poetry. I was introduced to it very early because I grew up in the town William Carlos Williams, where William Carlos Williams was, and his son was my first pediatrician. So yeah, that's true. His son fixed my broken clavicle. So my mother says, "Oh, that's how this happened, this poetry thing." But I never conceived of myself as an artist. I mean, I was like on a path. I was gonna, go to grad school and like get a secure job and do that thing. There was no like being an artist wasn't a thing we do in my family. So I started taking workshops while I was practicing law, and just gradually became something I just wanted to do more and more, like became more and more necessary. And so I was older.
Where necessary goes to your question too. Like the stuff that people do because it's necessary to them. It becomes a fixation, this work. I think I was saying to the class this afternoon that my initial entryway into poetry wasn't writing it was writing essays about it, papers. Like I loved handing in papers. It made me feel smarter than all the jocks in my class to be able to unpack Eliot and Beowulf, to know that. And so for me, poetry was a cerebral thing. It was all up inside the skull. And then when I went to undergrad, I started going to slams. I started going to spoken word events, and then I watched people cry. I watched people rage. And not like rage to get the dying of the light, like Villanelle. I mean, really just ferocious stuff. And something about that visceral thing, I mean, I can never come close to what they do, but it started to matter on a different level. And I think, even after that, I don't think I wrote very much just because I was so in awe of what they were able to accomplish. It was so much more human than just receiving old dead people and writing papers about them. And then when I started writing, I find myself consistently trying to navigate the space between the intellectual, cerebral stuff that I love, and then the necessity, like the risk of putting yourself on the line.
Well, I'm really spoiled because I grew up in a family where poetry was really seen as the ultimate work.
Wow.
And that was the message I received from a very young age. And I remember being told by my father, who was an English professor, "Look at a loose end, kiddo. Why don't you go write a poem?" I was like 5. Yeah, so in a way it was good parenting. Good job, guys. So yeah, I think that I always expected it to be part of my life, and then they were rightly horrified when it actually became. But it was early.
Just let me guess. So you're gonna ask a question about the song? No, not at all. Do you guys have any particular process for going from on the page to actually performing?
What do you mean by process? You mean like
Is there
rehearsing in front of a mirror?
No, I mean, is there anything like that you like to go from just typing, from printed word on the page, like to actually how you kind of parse that out, how you're going to present it, and beyond just like looking in the mirror and what you're doing?
I don't do that actually. That's not what I do. I'm just saying. That's a hypothetical. I don't know if this answers your question, but I always read the poems out loud as I'm composing them.
Yes.
Sonia Sanchez, who's an American poet that you need to read. she often says that you need to read them out loud because your ear will catch what your eye will not. You all stare at screens and paper all the time. And you miss errors, you miss typos, all these things, but your ear is much more sensitive, and you start hearing where your breath runs out, or you start hearing where there's a clunky word or a false kind of line. And so I think that's part of the process for me, is I read, even if you're working in form with syllables, just to read the poem and hear, like, why are you breaking the line there? Is it arbitrary? I don't like arbitrary. I feel like there needs to be some kind of thing that is compelling that break, or that move on the page. So part of the process, I think, is oral, is to say it out loud, to hear it.
Yeah, I think poetry is always meant to be heard, right? So if it's not working sonically, it's not working. I had this really fortuitous commute when I was in graduate school. I lived up in Washington Heights, and I went and did my MFA at Columbia. And so there was this 25-minute or so train ride from my apartment to workshop. So I'd be working feverishly, trying to finish something decent for workshop, and then I would take the train down, and I would be thinking of it and sort of saying it to myself in my head. And I found that the parts that didn't work were the ones that I couldn't remember correctly. The ones where the sound wasn't working or something, was off. So I think I wasn't performing it at that time, but that's part of performing it, is paying attention to what it sounds like when you're not looking at it.
I'm not going to be too helpful on this point, because I guess performance is a concept. I don't really see myself as a performer, and I think on a lot of levels I'm still very uncomfortable with it. But I do also read my poems aloud while I write them, and I don't know, I think I think I'm probably pretty shy about presenting things in public, either publishing them or reading them in public.
Doesn't seem like it.
Last question. Who's got one? Annabelle, what do you want to know?
That's a curveball.
You always end up at the wrong time. Anybody have another question?
Would you like somebody else to read it?
Oh.
Right now?
No.
Oh.
Just in general, would you like somebody else to read it?
At my book release party, I had people read my poems, and there was part of me that loved it, and there was another part of me that was like, that's not how that's supposed to sound. So it's sort of like they're mine, and I feel very possessive over them, but there is such a joy in hearing how someone else conceives of the poem, because you can tell when someone else reads your poem that they think it means something different, which I love, because it does mean something different, hopefully, to the person who hears it than what it means to me. So it's bittersweet, it's fraught here.
Ask a question,
Can I ask
yes.
the last one?
You can ask the last
I know
one.
I was supposed to be last. Is there anything in particular about your writing processes that you feel like are unique or specifically helpful? Is there a time of day or a place or a state of mind or anything that you would share about that?
Very early morning before the world gets in my head.
God bless you. That's a real writer's answer.
4:30 in the morning. Or
Wow.
That's not even real time.
My writing process is always complicated by my family schedule, lately anyway. So I am completely writing against type right now, and I get up early and do it, which is just not native to me at all. I'm a night owl. So when I'm home, I write in the morning. When I get to go away, I usually write at night. But I guess the commonality is that it has to be when I'm by myself and when I can really hear myself. During the day when there's tons of books around. I know, well, you were saying you like to write in cafes.
I need to be around people. There needs to be some sort of ambient buzz. Subways, cafes. Even airplanes, trains. Like
Airplanes, really?
things have changed for me because I think that after this book was, a lot of the book was composed during graduate school, and so there were set deadlines. Those don't exist after you finish in a way. So I set deadlines for myself. Sometimes if I have a reading, I promise myself there will be a new poem for that reading. And so what that necessitates is I write on my phone. So I have a program that I just type things out and it syncs up with all my other devices. Then I transfer that to a journal by hand. Then I print that out. Then I edit on that. Then I type it back in. There's a lot of like weird. I don't know if any of you are bio students, but like a lot of like DNA transcription and translation going on. Like things get lost and things get broken. I've been playing with Twitter as a way of inspiring work and also putting things out. So the first poem I published to Twitter, it's like 7 couplets. So when you read them together as one, it's a sonnet. And so instead of 10 syllables, they're 8 because they don't fit in 140 characters. So things like that. So that's part of my process now. It's like I want like every couple of weeks to have something new that is out there. And I don't know if that's going to be part of anything, which is really freeing and liberating. Because I don't have another man, so I'm just making shit up, you know? That's all. That's the process.
And do you guys write on, write or type or both and all of that?
I always write with pen and paper, always, yeah. Until it gets to a stage where I have to, because I write a lot in forms, but forms that I kind of I don't even know what a crown of sonnets is, to tell you the truth. I was just telling them, I have to, no, I'm being totally serious. So, but, I'll play with the margins and write in a box, make little restrictions for myself, but I start everything on pen with pen and paper.
Restrictions are so good. Like there's no excuse for like writer's block. It doesn't exist. Give yourself a rule. It has to have a color in it. You gotta have this many syllables. Make the rules, make all the constraints up, and you'll find that it pushes you to do something odd outside of your usual process.
Yeah, I start writing and then I type and then I go to writing